Beat me, and I'll give you $1 million. Poker Pro laughed. Unaware Maid's daughter was a genius strategist. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. On a warm evening in Las Vegas, a poker tournament was about to take place at one of the city's most exclusive venues. The atmosphere was electric, the air thick with the scent of expensive cigars, and the clinking of glasses filled with fine whiskey. In the center of the room sat the table, the focal point of the night, surrounded by the wealthiest, most influential players in the world. And there, among them, was a young girl named Maria, the daughter of a maid, who had been brought into the tournament under peculiar circumstances. No one expected her to be there. In fact, no one expected her to do anything more than simply observe. After all, how could a maid's daughter, with no formal training or experience, possibly hold her own in a game against seasoned professionals? But Maria had something they didn't know about. A gift for strategy. It wasn't by accident that she was there, but rather by her mother's request for Maria to accompany her during her shift at the casino. At first, Maria sat quietly in the back of the room, watching as the men with their sleek suits and diamond-studded watches played their high-stakes hands. Her mother had always told her to stay quiet, to stay invisible in the background, but Maria couldn't help but observe. She watched how each player reacted to their cards, how they interacted with one another, and most importantly, how they underestimated the power of patience and observation. As the game went on, something unusual happened. The poker pro sitting at the center of the table, a well-known figure in the poker world, looked over at Maria and, with a laugh, said, "Beat me, and I'll give you $1 million." The room burst into laughter, as everyone assumed it was a joke. A maid's daughter, with no experience in the game, challenging one of the best poker players in the world? It was absurd. But Maria, her face calm and composed, simply nodded and said, "I'll take your challenge." No one took her seriously, and at first, neither did the poker pro. But as the game progressed, something remarkable began to unfold. Maria, using her keen observational skills and her sharp understanding of human behavior, started to make her move. She understood the subtle art of reading people, of knowing when to fold and when to raise. Her strategy was flawless, her movements deliberate, and she didn't show a single sign of nerves, even as the stakes grew higher. The poker pro, confident in his own abilities, didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. As the final hand approached, with $1 million hanging in the balance, Maria took a deep breath and made her move. The poker pro stared at her, speechless, as she played her hand perfectly, outwitting him and securing the win. The room fell silent. Maria, the maid's daughter, had done the impossible. She had beaten the poker pro at his own game, and with it, she had earned $1 million, a fortune that none of the players had ever expected her to win. The poker pro's face went pale as he realized that the joke had been on him all along. Maria's quiet, unassuming demeanor had hidden a genius strategist, someone who had seen the game from a different perspective and outplayed everyone at the table. It was a moment that would go down in history, and the lesson was clear: never underestimate the power of observation, strategy, and a calm mind under pressure. I'm sure the poker pro was still in shock from the unexpected loss, but Maria felt something much deeper, a strange sense of satisfaction. As the applause began to die down and the crowd slowly shifted their attention elsewhere, she remained seated at the table, her eyes quietly observing the reactions of the other players. The poker pro, now speechless, stood up and looked at her in disbelief. It wasn't just the loss that stunned him. It was the realization that someone so young, so out of place in this world, had outplayed him. His confidence, once so assured, was now shattered. He had underestimated her, and in doing so, had taught her exactly what she needed to know. Maria didn't gloat or celebrate. Instead, she simply folded her hands on the table and waited for him to speak. After a long moment, the poker pro finally managed to recover his composure, though his voice was tinged with a mixture of respect and surprise. You're no ordinary player," he said, his tone no longer mocking, but one of genuine admiration. The other players who had been watching the game closely nodded in agreement, their expressions now reflecting a newfound respect for the maid's daughter. Maria, though, wasn't interested in the praise. She didn't need their approval. She had already proven what she came to prove. She was more than they gave her credit for. As the event wrapped up and the last hand was played, Maria stood up and walked towards her mother, who had been watching from the sidelines, quietly proud but unsure of what was happening. Maria's mother, a woman of few words, placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder and said, "You did it. But what's next?" Maria smiled softly, a hint of mystery in her eyes. "I'll figure that out when the time comes," she replied. They left the venue quietly, unnoticed by most. But to Maria, that was exactly the point. She had proven herself not just with her skills, but with her patience, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her deep understanding of human nature. She was already thinking about the next challenge, the next game to be played. Maria knew that this was only the beginning. The Poker Pro's $1 million was nothing compared to the world of possibilities that now lay before her. As she walked into the cool night air with her mother, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. She had played her cards right, but the real game was just starting. It was no longer about poker or money. It was about the kind of person she was going to become. And Maria knew, deep down, that she would be ready for whatever came next. Maria's mind was still racing as she walked with her mother through the streets of Las Vegas, the cool night air brushing against her face. She hadn't expected the game to go the way it had, but as she replayed the hands in her head, she realized that her victory wasn't just about the cards. It was about understanding the people at the table, reading their reactions, and knowing exactly when to make her move. It was the quiet moments between the bets, the subtle shifts in body language, that told her everything she needed to know. Maria wasn't just playing poker. She was playing the game of human nature itself. As they reached their modest apartment, Maria's mother stopped at the door, her tired eyes studying her daughter. "What happens now?" she asked softly, almost as if afraid of the answer. Maria smiled, the weight of the victory still settling inside her. "Now we keep going. This was just one step. There's more out there." Her mother nodded, though a flicker of concern crossed her face. "But the money, the world you've stepped into, it's dangerous." Maria didn't flinch. She had already thought about the risks, but it wasn't fear that drove her. It was a deep, quiet certainty that she was meant for something bigger. "I know," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But I can handle it." The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and messages from people who had taken notice of Maria's skill. Word had spread about the maid's daughter who had outplayed the Poker Pro and won $1 million in a single game. The offers began rolling in, from private games with wealthy players to opportunities to travel across the country. But Maria wasn't interested in just being a pawn in someone else's game. She wanted control, to decide her own fate. It wasn't long before she found herself in another high-stakes game, but this time the stakes were much higher. She had been invited to a secretive tournament, one that promised more than just money. It promised influence. The players were powerful, connected, and ruthless. They were the kind of people who didn't lose, not because they were better at poker, but because they played a different kind of game. As Maria entered the tournament hall, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the room. The air was thick with tension, the kind of tension that only existed when the world's most powerful people were in one place, competing not just for money, but for dominance. She knew that in this room, there would be no second chances. But Maria wasn't intimidated. She had already proven that she could handle the pressure. And as the tournament began, she took her seat, her eyes scanning the room for the subtle signs that would reveal her opponent's weaknesses. The first hand was dealt, and Maria could feel the game unfolding. She wasn't just playing poker. She was playing the long game, the one where every move, every word, every gesture counted. She had seen enough to know that this game wasn't just about cards. It was about power. And this time, Maria was going to win on her own terms. Maria sat at the table, the weight of the tournament pressing down on her. This was not just a game of poker. It was a battle for control, power, and respect. She could feel the eyes of the other players on her, watching every move she made, every flicker of emotion on her face. The room was filled with the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the low murmur of poker chips being shuffled, but Maria's focus was laser-sharp. She had already proven herself in the previous game, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the players were more dangerous, and the game was about more than money. It was about survival. The first few hands came and went with little fanfare. She played conservatively, biding her time, carefully studying her opponents. Each player at the table had their own tell, their own way of reacting to pressure, and Maria was watching them all closely. One man, a corporate mogul with an air of arrogance, constantly tapped his fingers on the table whenever he was bluffing. Another, a seasoned gambler with a weathered face and sharp eyes, would occasionally glance at his chips before making his move, a subtle sign that he was trying to hide his nervousness. Maria didn't need to ask the obvious questions. She knew the game wasn't just about the cards. It was about outsmarting her opponents, making them think they had the upper hand when, in reality, they didn't. As the rounds continued, Maria's confidence grew. She was playing the game exactly how she wanted to. Slowly but surely, the other players began to underestimate her. They saw her as nothing more than the maid's daughter, a girl who had no place in this world of power and wealth. They were wrong. As the final hand approached, Maria felt the tension in the room mount. The stakes were higher than ever, and the players at the table were getting more aggressive. The corporate mogul, who had been playing aggressively all night, threw out a massive bet. His eyes gleamed with confidence, sure that his wealth and influence would intimidate Maria. But she didn't flinch. She stared him down, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. The room was waiting for her to make her move, but Maria knew exactly what she needed to do. She called his bet, her hand steady as she pushed her chips forward. The corporate mogul's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, trying to maintain his composure. The cards were revealed, and Maria's hand was stronger than anyone had expected. The corporate mogul's arrogance turned to disbelief as he realized he had been outplayed. Maria had once again done the impossible. She had beaten the best of the best. The room fell silent, the players stunned by her victory. It wasn't just the money that mattered now. It was the respect she had earned. As the other players stared at her, Maria stood up, her heart pounding with exhilaration. She had won more than just the game. She had proven that she was more than anyone had ever given her credit for. She was no longer the maid's daughter. She was a force to be reckoned with, and no one in that room would ever forget her name. She had not only played the game, she had changed it. After her stunning victory, Maria felt the weight of the room slowly lift as the other players started to recover from their shock. The tournament had ended, but the ripple effect of her win was just beginning. The corporate mogul, who had lost everything in the final hand, sat in stunned silence, his face pale as the reality of his defeat settled in. Maria, however, felt no desire to gloat. She had already proven everything she needed to prove. The $1 million was just a number. What truly mattered was how she had earned it. As the players began to pack up, the tournament organizers approached her with respectful nods. They were used to seeing skilled players, but never someone like Maria. She was still just a young girl, with nothing but raw talent and a keen sense of observation. Yet she had outwitted the best in the room. That was incredible. One of the organizers said, his voice full of awe. We'd like to invite you to more exclusive tournaments. You could make a name for yourself in this world. Maria nodded but didn't respond immediately. She knew that this game, like all the others, was just another stepping stone. What mattered now was what she did next. Her mind was already calculating her next move, analyzing the opportunities she had just unlocked. The world she had stepped into was filled with power, influence, and risks. But Maria wasn't intimidated. She had already survived the most dangerous game, being underestimated. Her mother, waiting patiently by the door, looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and worry. She had always known that Maria was special, but this was something else entirely. Maria had done the impossible, and now there were no more limits. You did it, her mother said softly, her voice filled with pride. But what now? Maria glanced around the room, taking in the quiet aftermath of the tournament. We keep going, she said simply. This is just the beginning. They left the venue together, Maria with her head held high, her heart still racing from the intensity of the game. The money was already spent in her mind. What she had gained was far more valuable than any cash prize. She had earned respect, and with that, doors began to open. In the coming days, Maria received invitations to more private games, each one more exclusive than the last. She was no longer just the maid's daughter. She was someone to be watched, someone who had the power to change the game. As she sat in her small apartment later that night, Maria reflected on how far she had come. A few months ago, she was just an observer, someone who had only dreamed of a life beyond her mother's cleaning supplies and worn-out clothes. Now, she was sitting at the table with the world's wealthiest, playing a game that was no longer just about luck. It was about strategy, influence, and who controlled the narrative. Maria knew that her journey was far from over. She had learned that the true power wasn't in the cards you held, but in the ability to read the room, to understand people, and to stay one step ahead of everyone else. And that, Maria was determined to do. As the weeks passed, Maria's reputation grew, but so did the pressure. Invitations to exclusive poker games arrived daily, each one more extravagant than the last. The stakes were always higher, the players more influential, and the risks greater. But Maria wasn't fazed. She had learned early on that the key to success wasn't about how much money you had. It was about how well you could control the game, read your opponents, and know when to act. Her strategy was no longer about proving herself. It was about staying ahead of the curve. The next tournament she entered was nothing like the last. Held in a private, luxurious mansion on the outskirts of Los Angeles, it was an invitation-only event. The room was filled with billionaires, tech moguls, and celebrities, all seasoned players, used to bending the world to their will. Maria walked in, her appearance as unassuming as ever, but her mind was already calculating her next move. She was no longer intimidated by the lavish surroundings or the powerful figures sitting around the table. She knew that she had something they didn't, the ability to see through the facade. The tournament began, and the tension in the room was palpable. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the faint hum of whispered conversations. Maria kept her focus on the cards, but she was equally focused on the players. She could see the cracks in their armor, the subtle tells that revealed their true intentions. One player, a wealthy tech entrepreneur, couldn't help but glance at his phone every few minutes, as if seeking reassurance. Another, a real estate mogul, made a slight adjustment to his posture whenever he was bluffing. Maria watched them all, her eyes sharp, her mind calculating. The first few hands passed without incident, but then came the turning point. The entrepreneur, growing more nervous as the game progressed, bet heavily on a weak hand, hoping to intimidate the other players. Maria didn't flinch. She called the bet and then raised him, her movements deliberate, her face unreadable. The table went silent as the entrepreneur hesitated, his confidence slipping. After a long pause, he folded, leaving Maria with the pot. The other players were watching her now, their expressions a mix of admiration and wariness. They had underestimated her, just like everyone else had. But Maria wasn't concerned about their opinions. She knew the real game was about the power she could wield in this room, not just the chips in front of her. As the game continued, Maria's calm, calculated approach became more evident. One by one, the other players fell, until only she and the real estate mogul remained. He was a tough opponent, no doubt, but Maria had already mapped out his every move. As the final hand was dealt, Maria's heart raced, not because she was nervous, but because she knew exactly what she needed to do. The real estate mogul, confident that he had the upper hand, pushed all his chips forward in a final, desperate move. Maria, however, remained steady. She called his bet, then raised him once more, pushing him to the brink. He hesitated, a bead of sweat forming on his brow, but Maria's eyes never left his. He folded, defeated, and the room erupted in stunned silence. Maria had won again, but this time it wasn't just about the money. It was about dominance, control, and the realization that she was no longer just a player in their game. She was the one setting the rules. The silence in the room after her victory was deafening. Maria could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but she didn't let it show. She had just outplayed them all again, and for the first time in her life, she felt a true sense of power. She had come from nothing, from the back rooms of high-end hotels where no one saw her, and now she stood at the pinnacle of one of the most exclusive circles in the world. Her mother, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, finally stepped forward, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "Maria, you've done it again," her mother said, her voice trembling slightly. Maria simply nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "It's just the beginning," she replied softly, though inside, she knew how much her life had already changed. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of offers and opportunities. People who had once ignored her now sought her out. Businessmen, celebrities, and other poker champions all wanted a piece of Maria. But she wasn't interested in the attention. She didn't care about their offers, their money, or their admiration. What mattered was that she was in control. She knew that the game she was playing wasn't just about poker. It was about influence. She had the power to shape her own future, to change the rules, and to create a new world for herself. Her next move was already in her mind. She would no longer just be a player in their game. She would become the one making the decisions. But with power came responsibility, and Maria was keenly aware of that. She had seen the ruthlessness of the world she had entered, and she knew that she couldn't trust anyone. Not completely. She couldn't let her guard down, not even for a moment. Maria's next challenge came when she was invited to a high-stakes charity poker game. The game was to be held in a private mansion, attended by some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the world. The stakes were astronomical. Millions of dollars would be on the line, but the real prize was the influence she could gain by winning. As Maria entered the mansion, she couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. The room was filled with the same air of arrogance and entitlement that she had seen at previous games. The guests were all high-profile individuals, the kind of people who thought their wealth and status made them untouchable. But Maria knew better. She had already seen how these people operated, how they used their money and power to manipulate others. This time, she wasn't going to let them control the narrative. She had one goal: to show them that no amount of wealth or status could shield them from someone who truly understood the game. The game began, and Maria quickly settled into her rhythm. As the hands were dealt, she took her time, carefully observing each player, watching for any signs of weakness. One by one, the other players made their moves, but none of them noticed how Maria was slowly but surely gaining the upper hand. Her strategy was simple. She played the long game, letting the others make the first moves, then exploiting their weaknesses. As the final hand approached, Maria had already secured a sizable lead. The others at the table, oblivious to her growing dominance, continued to bet heavily, convinced that they could still win. But Maria knew better. She had already seen through their bluffs, their tells, and their confidence. When the final card was revealed, Maria was the only one left standing. The others stared at her in disbelief, unable to comprehend how they had been outplayed by someone they had underestimated from the start. Maria had done it again. She had taken control of the game and claimed her victory. But unlike the previous games, this time she wasn't just taking the money. She was taking something much more valuable: respect. As the room emptied and the guests made their way home, Maria stood there, her heart still racing from the intensity of the game. She had proven, once again, that she was not just a player. She was the one who controlled the game. Maria's rise to the top was now undeniable. She had proven herself not just with the cards, but with her sharp intellect, her ability to read the room, and her unshakable confidence. Yet, with every victory, Maria found herself facing new challenges. The more she won, the more the game shifted. It wasn't just about playing poker anymore. It was about navigating a world where everyone around her seemed to want something from her. Wealth, power, influence, it was all within her reach now. But the price for it was steep. Her phone rang constantly with offers and demands from people she had never imagined would even know her name. The calls came from financial giants, celebrities, and even politicians, all eager to connect with the young poker prodigy who had taken the gambling world by storm. But Maria wasn't interested in their deals. She had already learned that in this world, trust was a currency more valuable than money. And trust, she realized, was in short supply. The invitations to play in even more exclusive tournaments kept rolling in, each one offering more money, more recognition, and more influence. But Maria was starting to see the dark side of all of this. At first, she thought the high stakes and the players involved were just part of the thrill. But as she spent more time in these circles, she saw the lengths people would go to in order to maintain their power. She had learned to outplay people at poker, but now, she needed to outsmart them in the game of life. One evening, as Maria sat in a high-rise penthouse overlooking the lights of the city, she received a call that would change everything. It was from a man who was known for his connections in the political world. He had heard of her success and wanted to meet. At first, Maria was hesitant. She knew that getting involved with the wrong people could lead her down dangerous paths. But something about the man's tone intrigued her. He wasn't asking for a game. He wasn't offering money. He simply wanted to talk. Maria agreed, arranging to meet him at a private venue. The night of the meeting, Maria arrived early, as usual. She wasn't one to take risks, and she knew how to be cautious, even when surrounded by the most powerful people in the world. As the man arrived, she studied him carefully. He was charismatic, well-dressed, but there was something unsettling about him. He smiled and greeted her with a firm handshake, but Maria could tell there was more to this encounter than he was letting on. "I've been watching you," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Your talent is undeniable, but there's more to you than just your poker skills. You've got something that can change the game." Maria didn't speak at first. She was used to people talking around her, trying to figure out what made her tick. But this was different. This man wasn't trying to flatter her. He was speaking to her in a way that made her feel like he already knew her. "What game are you talking about?" she asked, her voice steady. The man leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "The game of influence. The real power doesn't lie in cards or money. It's in the ability to control people, to make them think they're playing the game when, in reality, you're the one pulling the strings." Maria's heart raced. She had always known there was more to this world than what she had seen on the poker tables, but hearing it from this man made everything feel more dangerous. "And what do you want from me?" she asked, her voice cold now. "Nothing," the man replied, smiling. "I just want to see if you're ready to play the real game. If you are, we can make sure you're never underestimated again. You'll be untouchable." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. She had already proven that she could outplay anyone at the table, but now, she was being offered something much bigger, something that could change her life forever. But was she ready for it? Was she ready to play a game that wasn't about cards or money, but about control? As the man stood up and left the room, Maria was left with a decision that would define her future. She had spent her life being underestimated, but now, she was the one holding all the cards. The question was, what would she do with them? As the weeks passed, Maria found herself standing at the crossroads of a new life. The call from the mysterious man, whose words still echoed in her mind, had planted a seed that she couldn't ignore. The offer to step into a world of power, influence, and control was tempting, but Maria knew there was a price to pay. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the world she had entered was full of shadows. Everyone had an agenda, and she would need to decide whether she wanted to be one of the players or become the one who controlled the game. Her mind, ever sharp, worked through the possibilities. She had always been able to outthink her opponents at the poker table, but this wasn't poker. This was life, and the stakes were higher than anything she had ever imagined. The more she thought about the man's words, the more she saw how everything in her life had led to this point. Her rise from the back rooms of the casino to the penthouses and private mansions had been driven by more than just her skill at cards. It was her ability to read people, to see the world for what it really was, and to move with precision when others faltered. But this new game, the one the man had offered her, was about much more than just reading the room. It was about controlling the narrative itself. Maria knew that to truly master the game, she would have to take risks. But she wasn't afraid of risk. She had gambled her way to the top and won every time. Now, she had to decide if she was ready for the ultimate gamble, stepping into the shadows and wielding power from behind the scenes. It wasn't about money anymore. She had plenty of that. It was about influence, about creating a legacy that no one could erase. One night, as Maria sat alone in her apartment, looking out over the bright lights of the city, she made her decision. She would take control of the narrative. She would step into that world, but on her own terms. She would never be a pawn again. Maria picked up her phone and dialed the number the mysterious man had given her. It rang once, twice, and then he picked up. "I'm ready," she said, her voice calm and steady. The man on the other end of the line was silent for a moment, but then a laugh, smooth and satisfied, filled the air. "I knew you would be," he said. "We're going to change everything, Maria. You'll be unstoppable." Maria didn't smile, but she felt a surge of determination inside her. This was her moment. She had played the game, she had won, and now She would define the rules. She had already proven her worth to the world. Now, she would prove it to herself. The path ahead was uncertain, but Maria wasn't afraid of uncertainty. She had always thrived in it. As she stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city that had once seemed so far out of reach, Maria knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a player in the game. She was the game.